And if you've ever wondered why mechanics are always mad at engineers, what's up everybody, welcome to Hammerdown Motorsports. Today we have our 2007 Ford Ranger and we're getting rid of some of the clunks that we've had in the front end. Obviously we've done the lower ball joints, we did the inner and outer tie rods, and it's a 2007 with 188,000 miles, so definitely the bushings have seen better days. So we were having some clunking on the driver's side, and what I ended up doing was I replaced our bushings over here on our lower control arm. As I had that out, I painted everything, painted the spring, got everything looking nice, but that has all been replaced, and we're going to show you guys how to do that on the passenger side, how everything went down with getting that all apart and getting your bushings removed. And you can see by the big pile of rusty garbage that came out of there actually went into the frame, and where a lot of like road grime and things collect inside there, I was able to clean that out and paint that the best that I could. Try to give this truck the longest life it possibly can have, because I honestly really do like these little Rangers and I want to keep this one on the road as long as I possibly can. All right, so first off, we're gonna take off our outer tie rod. I got our cotter pin removed, and then we got our 21 millimeter here. Zip that guy out. Then we're gonna grab our swinging press, give it a couple of taps here on the knuckle, get it to pop out. Might need two hands for this. All right, a few good smacks later. We'll get this out of the way. We're gonna be doing this kind of the more, I guess, less things have to come off kind of way. And then we're gonna leave this entire knuckle and everything kind of intact so we can just pop it back together when we're done. It's a little bit of kind of finagling, but I mean, if you really wanted to, you can pull this entire thing off, get it out of your way. But I did the other side the same way we're doing it, so this is the way we're gonna go with it. And it actually wasn't too bad and saved us a little bit of reassembly in the end. Next, we're gonna pull our cotter pin out of the bottom. I usually just use a side cutter like this. Bend that up, got the end, the other end to poke through. And then there you go, out it comes. And of course, used cotter pins go in the trash. We don't reuse those around here. We got our 15/16. Run that nut off. So at this point, we have our spring putting pressure onto our lower control arm, which is then pushing onto the knuckle, and the knuckle is still attached to our upper control arm, so everything is still gonna stay together here. We don't really have to worry about that spring. We also have our shock and our sway bar link. So at this point, we're gonna remove the sway bar link and the shock, and then we can move on to the next step, and I'll kind of show you how getting the spring out isn't so terrible as some might think. So for our sway bar link, we have a 14 millimeter wrench up top, and then we've got a 16 millimeter for the bottom, and we'll just run that out, get our pieces removed, get that out of our way. So now that the bottom nut's removed, you can pull this up through the top, just kind of inspect it, make sure that everything looks decent on it. These ones didn't look terrible, so probably end up reusing those at least for now. And then just kind of try not to lose your bushings. Get this stuff piled over here out of our way, and then we'll go after getting the shock removed. So luckily these shocks haven't been in here for too long. We got a 14 millimeter wrench up on that little nut there on the top, so I'm gonna run this out. Sometimes they get rusty and you have to use some penetrating oil and whatnot to get these apart, but luckily enough ours hasn't been all crusted up just yet. And sometimes they get so bad they don't even want to come out, and then there's little tricks you can do. These ones aren't bad because they're so high up and pretty easy to access, but sometimes they're like deep down in on certain vehicles, and you can actually stick a deep socket over top of them with a breaker bar and just kind of bend back and forth and snap the top of the shock off if you're replacing your shocks. It saves you a lot of grief trying to get these out, but it's one of those tricks that I've used in the past to help you get the job done without fighting too much or getting out the torch and making a bunch of smoke and everything else like I've seen some guys do in some of the places I've worked. But you live and you learn. Just gonna work this bushing up here. We've got our washer, we got our nut and our bushing. Set that over here with the rest of our stuff there. And then we've got two nuts on the bottom here. I think they are 13 millimeter. Yep, 13 millimeter. So run those two out and then we'll get our shock out of the way. So once you have all those removed, we'll just nicely work our shock out of there. And then there's also the washer and the lower bushing as well, which are gonna come falling out of there. Make sure you don't lose those. We'll need those on our reassembly process. And as you can see, our Ranchos are already looking a little rough. Got some rust starting on them already, and they're not even a year old. So next up, I'm gonna grab my little twist jack right there. I'm gonna put it underneath our lower control arm. I was gonna use my transmission jack, but it actually, the little twist jack gets up in here and it has a really good grip. And there's this little kind of pocket in here where the spring sits. So it's not gonna be kind of sliding around or worried about anything like that. So we're gonna take that pressure, put it onto our spring, and then we can hit on our lower ball joint. Also, this is a lot bigger, so the little telepost jack is going to be easier to work around to get a good swing on this, to get this to break with our little wedge where our ball joint comes through our knuckle. Get that separated, and then we can push this out of the way, and then we can safely lower down our lower control arm, taking the pressure off the spring, and then get our two bolts removed, and this entire assembly will come out. So now that we have our pressure on our lower control arm, we can hit our knuckle and get this to separate. Maybe give it one more than it needed, but got it separated. So that's what it looks like when you got pressure on here. Then you can get this to come off, and then what we're gonna do is we're gonna actually lift up a little bit more, enough to get this stud to pass through, and then we can move our knuckle out of the way. So I used my old Mayhew Dominator with the big hook end on it, and got in here, got a good amount of leverage, and was able to pop it down. You can see over here, I do have the truck right off of the lift on that one corner, but we do also have it supported in the rear, so everything is good with that. But I was able to get enough where we could move that lower control arm with the ball joint out of our knuckle. We still have a fair amount of pressure on our spring right now. So what we can do now is just lower this. And what you want to do as this comes down, make sure, keep your knuckle out of the way. You can put something on here and tie it out of the way, but it's not too big of a deal. You just want to be aware that those two are going to make contact at some point. And these springs are not really too much to worry about. Obviously, you want to be careful, and if you're fairly inexperienced, you want to maybe take this to a mechanic shop where they're used to dealing with these types of things, because it's always a potential danger with springs and energy and all of that kind of thing. I might need two hands just to kind of keep this out of the way as I spin this down, and then I'll show you how we get our lower control arm all the way down, released, and then we get our spring out of there. So here you can see how low this actually comes down. You can see where it used to ride up in here, and now it's way down here. But we do have our jack completely removed, and I can move on this lower control arm a little bit, no problem. Our energy has been pretty much dissipated, and there is actually a kind of a little hook where our spring sits on that control arm. So when we put it back in, we're not really worried about it popping it back out at us, because it does have a place to sit. You just want to make sure you know your orientation and make sure you don't put it in upside down. It is pretty easy to know which side is the bottom of the spring. The top, it actually is pretty much touching on one of these rungs, and the bottom does have a fairly big gap over there. But we are going to remove our bolts now that go through our bushings, and then we're able to get our lower control arm out and get our spring out as well, and then we can clean them all up and get our new bushings in, get it all painted up, and make it look like the other side. So now we have our 21 millimeter, and there's actually a flag nut on the other side, so just remember which side goes to which. It's not too hard to remember, but you want to put those in the proper way when you put it all back together. And this is the flag nut we were talking about. So we have this longer one here for the front. It actually hooks in to our frame there a little bit. And our rear one is right by the catalytic converter. So I'm gonna have to go get my wobble. All right, wobble installed. Does not like me. Does not like me. Still kind of a weird angle. Got it to turn. Still want to give us a rodeo. Especially with one hand. I need two hands for this and then we'll get her. So this is me doing things differently than I did on the other side. I actually took away our jack completely, and yeah, not a pressure spring ejection, but a gravity one. So as soon as the pressure came off, the control arm wanted to come down and then our spring just fell out. So just going bouncing down the floor here. Not like it was shooting out at us under spring pressure or anything like that, but yeah, should have left the jack underneath it and then we would have had a little bit more of a controlled release of our spring, but all is well and it's all good. Just keep that in mind. But now our bolts are removable. We can just pull these out now. We have no pressure on them whatsoever, nothing holding them on the inside. So we'll move those two bolts out and then we can take our lower control arm over to the bench and show you guys the bushings we're gonna replace. And if you've ever wondered why mechanics are always mad at engineers, so you've got 1,000,000 miles for the bolt to go in this way, but you put the bolt in this way, so then it's gonna hit the catalytic converter and that doesn't move. So you gotta unbolt the catalytic converter from the exhaust manifold and hope you got enough room to move that back. So all that extra work just because they put the bolt in that way. Fun times. All right, so up there we have our bolts for exhaust, and I was able to get on with a 15mm on a 1/2 inch, and it said no thank you. It did not want to come out. So we've got our map gas, we've got our torch end here. Gonna give that thing some heat and then we're gonna put some knocker loose on it and hopefully we got a little bit of luck. And we got a little smoke because I had to let that heat up pretty good, and then I actually put pea blaster on it because my knocker loose is not a spray bottle, so I could not get this little can up in there. I need to get some of this in like a spray. That would be very ideal, or I can actually probably pour that into a spray bottle, but that stuff seems to work pretty good. Pea blaster works pretty good too, so let that smoke clear, let it soak in there a little bit and give it another try. All right, well, we're on our second round of heating the top one. I got the bottom one out. It was a little bit of a struggle. Definitely took a lot of force and a lot of heating and spraying and all of that, being that it is an exhaust bolt with 188,000 miles on it. So you don't want to break these off. That is not a good time because then you have even more work to do. So we're going to be working on this top one, getting it all sorted the best that we can and nicely lubricated so we can get our impact and our wobble in there and get that removed, and hopefully we can get our exhaust to move properly, get that bolt out of there. Always extra work sometimes that you don't expect. All right, so bolt is out. What we had to do is push this catalytic converter. Actually, I pushed it back and then towards the passenger side, and then it gives you enough room to get that bolt out. But yeah, removing exhaust bolts shouldn't be part of a suspension job, but here we are. So now that we have both bolts out, let's see if I can one hand this out of here. I don't think I'm going to do that. I think I'm going to use two hands, but get this control arm out and show you guys what our bushings look like. So now with our control arm out, you can see in here where that bushing was moving around, you can see how it's made a nice little shiny spot on the frame, and that's where that bushing was moving around. You can see on the front side here, it's done it a little bit as well. So we'll go over to the bench, show you guys what we're looking at here. And you can see, look at that. That is definitely no bueno. And this side as well. Nice and cracked up rubber and everything like that. You can see where that's kind of misshapen, where that's been moving around. And that's what's been giving us our clunks and our not so positive feeling about the front end of our truck. So the bushings are definitely important on these things, and once they get to this age, I mean, it's age and a lot of use, and they just get dried up and end up looking like that. So time to change them out. So here we have our part number for the ones that I got from Rock Auto. These are Dormans. Like they have a Lexus on the box, so they must be good then, right? So we got our bushings right here. Not exactly sure what I paid for these, but they weren't that much. So definitely worth the investment if you're willing to put in the work, get these removed. One thing that I did find on the other side is when you get your tooling hooked up, like I did put some knocker loose in here already, just to try to give it a little bit of a fighting chance. These are rusted in, obviously, and I'm using my ball joint press. You can rent these. You probably even get them to use for free from the parts store, but I have one of my own. And one thing I did notice is when you do put pressure on these will flex. So they want to squish these ears together. So what I did is I found something that was substantial, which was this old school Craftsman reducer, and it fits in there. So it'll keep those ears from getting squished, and then it'll end up not allowing this to have a nice clear path to remove. It'll kind of want to jam up in there. So that's one thing to remember as well. I also have my little frame repair kit here with that little tool that goes out like that. And I was able to stick that in there as well, just to kind of give it some pressure outwards. And just kind of one of those things with finagling these things out when they're all rusted up, using the tools that you have. So this is what we got going on to press these out. Now I've got my spacer here, so we're going to be pushing this inside piece up this way, just because the big part is obviously on the ends of these. So we're going to want to squish this down, and then the sleeve should push out through here. And then I'm going to try to this is the bigger side, and this is a little loose, but once it tightens down, it should be able to hold it in place enough for us, because these do have quite a bit of spring to them. And I do have a piece of flat bar here that I put in just because it is a little bit tight just by how much we have to move here. The bushing is pretty long. It's not your standard ball joint type thing. So I do have a couple little extra things that I've modified. So piece of steel there. And I've got a couple other little things here that I've made over the years for different things, like this guy here, and just using bolts and washers and fittings and old plates for hydraulics and stuff like that, which works pretty good. This is a solid piece of steel, but sometimes you just got to use what you got, and this is what we have. So we want to put some pressure on this, and hopefully these ears don't come in too far, and we get this thing to snap out of here. So we got the one here ready to come out, just like this, which looks a whole lot easier than it actually is, but it actually isn't terrible. To be honest, it's sitting in there like that. You do have that protrusion on this side, and step one, using the flat bar, got it all the way so it was flush with this piece here. See that little part sticking out? Then, once this part touches the control arm, it can't go any further, you want to get a bolt. But I just did one here. I had to cut off the end of it just to make it a little shorter, put a washer on it, and then that sticks inside our bushing like this. And then I put our flat bar on top of that, so it gives us enough room that we can get our other piece, which is this guy right here, up here. And then when the flat bar pushes on the bolt, this keeps everything nice and centered, that we can get enough pressure to push that through. And then we have our bushing removed. So get this out. I do have a couple of little bit of marks here because I did use my air hammer just because it was slightly tilted. So I just wanted to straighten it out, give it the best chance of coming out easily as possible. But here's our old part ready for the garbage can. And then we'll clean this whole control arm up, get everything nicely deburred and everything all nice and clean, and then we can put our new stuff in once we get our other bushing pushed out, which is the same process. So much like the other side, this one that was worn more so was more of a fight, and that was just because of how squishy this rubber is. It's so far gone that this center sleeve actually wants to push down really far inside there until it'll actually allow the outer sleeve to move, which is what we want. So I had to stack some washers on our bolt and then set that in there, give us a little bit more pressure, and then put our piece of flat bar on top and squeeze it down until it finally popped. So you can stack more than 3 on there if you have to. I got 2 more over there. Actually, I think I used maybe 5 on the other side. It was pretty bad, but was able to get it out without too much problem. It's just trying to troubleshoot those things when you're getting everything set up for the first time is usually the hard part. Second time you do it, it's not too bad at all. So now they got everything removed, I grabbed some Scotch-Brite, kind of clean up our bores a little bit, make sure we don't have any burrs or anything, or any rust, things that are going to be in our way. And then we're going to grab some copper coat. We're going to put some in all of our bore locations, and then we can get our same press tool all set up, ready to go to put our new bushings back into their new homes. So this is the front of our control arm. So the control arm that goes to the front of the vehicle, obviously. So we want to do this one first, because what I do is I run this part of the tool through the hole for our second one. So you want to do this one first, and then you're good to go. Take reference to how much space you have from this shoulder to this piece of our control arm, just so you have the bushing in the same position as it was before. Make sure your ears aren't squished together or anything like that, and everything is nice and straight. But we do have the one in there. This is all loose, but this is just to show kind of what I have set up here for our clamping force. So we have our smaller ring here that's going to go around our bushing that goes to our control arm, and then I have this plate right here. Obviously there is other attachments that other kits will have. This is just what I'm using because this is what I have. So this is how I got it all together, and it actually worked pretty good. And there it is. We got our new bushings installed. Just got to make sure that your ears are nice and straight. Sometimes they want to squish down a little bit, even with having something inside there. So what I did is actually took my air hammer and just kind of hit on the upper side. This upper side is the side that isn't as tight. It's more tight in the bottom, and it actually straightened out a little bit more. Just kind of everything found its happy place, and we're ready to get this all nicely cleaned up. I mean, obviously it's not a necessary step to clean this and paint this, but I'm going to do that because it's my truck and I want everything to be as rust-free as possible. And honestly, you can go and buy control arms. Rock Auto sells those too. They're a little bit more money, a little less work, but you're going to end up with probably a cheaper control arm, in my opinion. I like to use the OE stuff. This was made to last through warranty with the truck, and I just think it's more of a quality metal, so I want to stick with that instead of putting something that may be made with a lesser desirable material. So that's why I'm rebuilding these, or we've rebuilt these, and hopefully it's going to make this little Ranger last a long time. All right, so I got everything cleaned up, and then we got a nice fresh coat of paint on our lower control arm and our spring. Just kind of took a steel brush and cleaned up all the loose stuff and brake cleaned it down, got all the oils off, and gave it a quick coat, and it looks pretty nice. So it'll match our other side. And then while the spring is out, I'm going to be going up in this area here, and I'm going to reach down into the frame as far as I can, get any loose stuff out of there, clean this up the best I can, and I'm going to spray some paint in this area as well, just because we're probably not going to have this apart again like this, so we might as well take that opportunity to clean everything up as best as we can and do the same thing that I did over here on this side. So you guys are putting this thing back together and you're wondering, how am I going to get that lower ball joint back in? I've got bars, I'm trying to lift jack the truck up, and it's all the way off the ground, and it still doesn't want to go. Well, look, I can just push mine in by hand. There's a couple different ways I've done that. One, pressure on the lower control arm. There's a nice pocket under there for a jack like this, and then I come along over here, go from the control arm over to the frame, and just suck this thing together as tightly as you can, and you can achieve the ability to get that ball joint back in. It is pretty tight, but a quarter ton come along. If you're working on your own stuff, you're going to use this thing again. Trust me, it's a very handy tool. You can get them on Amazon for 30, 40 bucks. So definitely worth the money to invest in that if you're doing this kind of work. But that's how I got that in there, and I'm pretty sure that'll help a few of you guys out. So we're making sure that we've got it in the hole and backed off to the reverse position. So we just release and let everybody come back together, and then we can release some pressure off of our lower control arm, and our spring is going to be our downward force. And then you can see everybody come together just like that. Sometimes you got to give it a little jiggle, make sure that that wedge is going in the way it's supposed to. And there it is. The stud is back where it needs to be in the knuckle. We can release this all the way because now our downward force is going into the bottom of the knuckle and our upper control arm is holding the top of it, so the spring can't go anywhere. So you really want to be careful, obviously, of that. But then we're going to I'm going to do a little touch up here because I did scratch a couple little bits, just moving things around. And we're going to put our nut back on here, torque the spec, put our pin in, and then we can do a little bit of touch up here and get our tie rod end back on, and our sway bar link, and our shock. And you can see we have our nice shiny new sway bar bushings in there, and those fit a whole lot tighter than those old ones. They were pretty much shot, and it's really nice to be able to get something like that for like 13 bucks off Amazon, especially for a Moog part, which did say it was made in China, but I mean, it's probably better than some of those brands you find with like all the letters and everything as their name. But we'll get it all back together, show you guys the final product. All right, we're back on the ground. Wheels are torqued. It's going to take it for a little drive, make sure our clunking is gone, and then we're going to re-torque, just make sure that everything stays tight. I always do a recheck after a few miles just to make sure. But yeah, everything is torqued up and repinned and good to go, and we got some brand new bushings now, so we'll see if our clunks have disappeared. Here's a clunk test. Oh yeah, it is quiet. Obviously we do have just our standard cab rattles, which is our door and our passenger side, whatever, but yes, this thing used to clunk and rattle so bad. Now all you hear is our passenger door. Perfect. And we'll adjust that eventually, but suspension is tight and drives like a brand new 07 Ranger. Got a little smoke just from our P blaster burning off the exhaust there, but see, everything is nice, shiny, new looking, both sides. She's ready for a whole lot more miles. So there it is, everybody, our 2007 Ford Ranger front bushings complete. You guys saw there was a little bit of labor, obviously, to do this job, but definitely not impossible. But with that being said, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. If you did, don't forget to give it a big thumbs up. If you're new to the channel, hit that subscribe button. And as always, keep that hammer down.